Welcome to the world awaits.
Travel tales to inspire your wanderlust. Welcome back to The World Awaits, everyone. It's been an interesting week, hasn't it, Kirsty?
Yes, it certainly has, and we will get to that in a minute. But on a happier note, I've just been to New Zealand for a wedding in Christchurch. We were at this amazing venue, which is about not too far actually from the city, which is a 150-year-old whitewashed Mediterranean style building at a place called Trent's Estate Vineyard. Gosh, it was beautiful. And it was really lovely. We caught up with all of Dave's side of the family, wishing you a wonderful life together, Kathy and Drew, and thank you so much for having us there. And then afterwards, Dave and I went up to the Marlborough Sounds, which is at the top of the South Island on the East Coast, where we did a 3-day hike, bike and kayak, which I'm writing about for Australian Geographic Adventure. So I will be talking more about that in depth in a full episode next week. But I will tell you, it is hands down one of the most beautiful places I have been, not just in New Zealand, but just one of the most beautiful places I have been. It is stunning. The last time I was there was 27 years ago, and I wasn't quite sure if it would still meet my expectations of my memories from that time, because you look at things differently in 27 years, right? And so but no, absolutely, it was just mind-blowingly beautiful. And you can check it out on my Insta, which is Kirsty Wrights. But yeah, sadly, it's just been a really awful week globally, really. I mean, an awful few weeks for travel. And as we record this, about 115,000 Australians are still in the Middle East, and many of them are still stranded.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got a lot to say about this. Well, I've got a lot to say as usual, Kirsty, but one of those people is a family member of mine trying to get back home from Dubai. And just before we started recording, he just touched down in Melbourne, and it has been a hairy couple of days, actually. I mean, hairy few weeks since the first bombs were dropped in Iran. But, on a personal note, he was sending photos of 1,000-strong queues of people waiting to rebook. His ticket had been rebooked.
When did he go? Belle? When did he first go?
He went over there. He went over to Dubai for a week because we have family that lives in Dubai. He was taking my elderly mother-in-law, who's still there. Before all of this happened, so he left about I think about the 19th of February. So he was supposed to have a week there, and then the day before he was traveling back, this whole thing exploded, literally. So, so the chance, so he's been stuck there an extra week, more than a week, which doesn't sound like doesn't sound like a huge imposition, except because, I mean, there's so many mixed messages coming out of Dubai, isn't it? You see influencers, it's been really interesting to see what influencers have got to say, because a lot of them are like, oh, this is what's happening and life is going on as usual. I'm going down the beach. But then when you speak to others, it's like, well, we were on our balcony watching the Fairmont Hotel on the Palm Jumeirah being hit by a drone. And that was really close to where they're living. And it's one of the it's one of the most touristy parts of Dubai.
Brothers, when was your brother supposed to fly out? A week ago.
He was supposed to fly out the day after the bombing started. So that was his scheduled date. So there was absolutely no chance that he was going to get back. Suddenly it was like, well, hang on a second. He got a notification that his flight was cancelled, that his flight was postponed. And then it just started that process, that awful process that we all hate, of trying to call the airline, trying to find out what's going on the app, watching the news, the 24-hour news cycle. Because while we don't know what's going on, I mean, the airlines don't know what's going on either. And they've, it really brings into sharp relief how you find your information, doesn't it? And, whether the apps are up to date, how you rebook, because those global call centers have been completely overwhelmed. We know that quite.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm so interested in what's going on with your brother. So were they also worried? Like, were they concerned? Obviously, I mean, you think anyone that's been through there, and I was there like a year ago, I just cannot imagine like hearing of it being so close to you. And because it's obviously such a major transit point, were they worried while they were there, or were they staying far enough out that of that main centre that it wasn't such a concern for them.
No, well, as I said, they're quite close to the Palm Jumeirah. So they're pretty much the next district across. And so it was very up close, like it was very confronting for them, and it is confronting. And look, while he's been back he was prior to flying at the airport. So the call centers were completely overwhelmed. He went into the airport. They were doing only face-to-face bookings. This is through Emirates, which is, of course, the national carrier of Dubai or the flagship carrier. And so he was going to the airport every day. He said he spent 3 days in a row. When they did actually say that there are flights available, you had to be physically at the airport to get your ticket. So he would be there for 5 hours, 5 hours plus at a time. And so each day we're getting messages saying, I'm flying tonight, I've got the ticket, and then flight's been cancelled. Back at the airport the next day, queue for another 5 hours, 1,000 strong queues of people just trying to get on those flights. And then during all of this, the airport was, has been hit. There've been drone threats and drone attacks as well. And to the point where he was actually sending us photos of black smoke puffs beside the airport. It's very close. It's very up personal. And so when you see those photos of, the news reports of people coming off the flights and crying, you could kind of think, you're in a heightened state of fear for all of that time, or concern or anxiety. And the relief of getting back to Australia must just be incredible. So no, you've got to delve really deep into the geopolitics of the whole thing. Is Iran has made that agreement to hit only infrastructure and not residential. So they were taking a lot of consolation from that sort of thing. So, but then the Fairmont was, US owned property and all of that sort of stuff. So it does get, incredibly layered as to what's happening.
How come he managed to get out and your mother-in-law is still there?
Well, they're actually going back to Cairo, which is where they live.
Okay.
So, but the prices for those fares have increased exponentially. What was a relatively cheap ticket, like normally we pick up tickets of $400-500 to get over there, have now quadrupled, 5 times the price. So you're looking at, do you have that budget to spend the money on that, or do you just hedge your bets and stay in Dubai?
Yeah, gosh. And so how did he tell us how he eventually got out?
Well, we started getting messages last night saying, again, he was on the flight. He was booked on the flight, and then he's just staying at the airport with his luggage. I mean, remembering it also that it's Ramadan at the moment. So anybody who's Muslim is fasting as well. So they are just waiting their time out. He said that Emirates and the airport had been exceptional in that they were providing food. They were doing, which I said, are their cafes actually opening, or are they just relying on vending machines? And he said, no, there's cafes there. And I'm thinking, can you think of the workers that are actually working in the airport, running the cafes? So, the knock-on effect of who's affected by this is just astonishing. And then he was waiting to get onto the flight. They started boarding. And then instead of, they're going through the boarding gate, and then suddenly they find that the escalator is going in a different direction. And he was like, well, hang on, we're just being directed back off the plane and into the airport because there'd been another strike. And it just sounded absolutely terrifying. And anybody who's got a family member who's watching this is just thinking, like, there, but for the grace of God, go I. And so we found out since that, of course, that is the last flight out of Dubai. But he's managed to get home. Yeah, and his luggage has made it with him as well, which I think is just an incredible feat as well. But
did he say the plane was very full?
He did, actually. He said, because I'd been sending him the Australian reports where people had been saying, yes, we got out on previous flights, saying that the planes were half full. And I had heard commentators or, from the airline saying, we literally just grabbed whoever was in the airport at the time and chucked them on the plane. You can't be sitting around paging people to come in. He said that the flight was actually very full, but it wasn't 100% capacity. He had a seat beside him, which is just as well, because they spent 5 hours sitting on the tarmac. He said it took them so long to refuel. They were on an A380. And of course, then you've got to build in what your flight plan is going to look like, because in a time of global uncertainty, the other thing that is incredibly uncertain is your flight plan. So, normally airlines can ascertain where they're going to, the route that they're going to take, and they put their fuel on according to that with a bit of surplus. But for this, of course, it seemed that they would have had to have overloaded, to ramped it up to its full capacity. And he watched the flight path as they came back to Australia, and he said the whole time they were over the ocean, so they weren't flying over land masses, which is obviously as much as you could, which is obviously the safest route that you can do. So they had 5 hours sitting on the airport, sitting on the tarmac before they even took off. And he said everybody just passed out, waiting for this, waiting and hoping that they were going to get off the tarmac.
It's so glad, great that he's got home, and I mean, obviously, like you said, Belle, that they've actually stopped those flights now. But it's worth noting that in the last few days, also that all of the tour operators and obviously even some cruise lines are doing whatever they can to try and get people out. So there was an example of that, which is MSC Cruises, which organised flights for more than 1,500 people who were on the Arabia cruise line to try and get them out as well. And they, as we record, the 7 flights carrying MSC cruise guests have actually departed. And also those flights included dedicated charter services which operated, which MSC, organised. I mean, this whole thing does really prove how important it is to book through a travel advisor, really, because I've been speaking to a number of travel advisors as well, and travel advisor friends who have been saying that, I mean, they're just besides themselves at the moment, obviously trying to get their clients out any way they can, and they're doing it by ferry, people having to drive. Not, besides the fact that imagine just being stranded like your brother-in-law at the airport and not knowing and being diverted out when you think you're going to be getting on a plane. It's just you must be beside yourself. But these travel advisors were telling me that they've got clients that they've put on ferries to places, and then they don't know if they're going to get. They get from the ferry, then they've got to drive somewhere, and then they're going to trying other flight options. But obviously, all those flight options are diminishing as we record this. And the other thing we have to mention is that there's been more than 1,300 people deaths in Iran, and there's no signs of this slowing. So we're all watching this unfold day by day, as everyone else is. It would be remiss of us not to mention it. And it's such a devastating impact for everyone involved. So stay listening, because our tip this week gives some expert advice on what to do if you are holding airline tickets to Europe too in the next 6 months.
This week, my guest is the prolific Australian travel author, Lee Atkinson.
What made you want to get Lee on the pod, Belle?
Look, I've known Lee and followed her work for years, and she is the road trip queen. She has crisscrossed just about every road in Australia, and I mean literally, for her many, many books on best drives around the country. But she's also just back from motorbiking around Europe, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So for future plans. And I have dubbed this episode Europe by the Pillion Princess. So take a listen. Hi, Lee. Welcome to The World Awaits. So excited to have you on here, especially as I've been watching your European travels with just absolute amazement. So welcome to the podcast.
Oh, great to be here with you, Belle.
Now let's kick off, because we've done a little intro about you and some extraordinary adventures you've had in Europe by motorbike. But let's backtrack for a second and tell us a little about yourself, where you're based, and how long you've been a travel writer for.
Okay, I'm based in central Victoria in the Goldfields, which is a lovely place to live. Haven't been there that long. I used to live in northern New South Wales, so it was a bit of a change, especially in winter. I've been writing about travel now for, a very long time. I added it up today, 35 years. I kicked off in 1991.
Oh, my
where it was a very different world back then in terms of writing and publishing and no internet and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
That's a job. My first job out of university was working for the cartography department for the NRMA, which is like the RACV in New South Wales. And so I used to travel around New South Wales all year with a map maker. I didn't draw the maps, but I did all the information and wrote all about the towns and attractions. And in those days, you actually drove the roads to put on a map. And so that was a lot of fun. And then it just kicked off from there, really.
Oh my goodness. So that explains, I never knew that about your background. That explains your book style because, your latest book, Ultimate Backroads and Detours Australia, that's all, that is one in the latest in this series of road trip guides that you've written, coastal roads, ultimate road trips. You are the road trip queen, basically. And all of these are super detailed. I've actually got your Explore Australia by Camper Trailer, which I was using because the mapping was so good. When I was in Central Australia late last year, I used your book. I was like, yeah, Lee's got it all down there and it's so clear. That makes perfect sense. So how many books have you written, like just out of interest?
I'm just finalising. I've just submitted the manuscript and doing the edits on my 20th. But 2 will be published later this year. So there's 18 that have been gone out into the world and made their own way. So
oh my goodness.
not all, but mostly about road trips. So I am a bit of a road trip junkie.
I prefer road trip queen. What's the newest book? Can you tell us yet?
The newest book is a sort of road trips and nature escapes. So that's a lot of fun because I do love camping. I love getting out into wild places. I'm very antisocial, so I love going where there are no other people and no crowds. And so it sort of ties all that in. But it's also got a bit of luxury because these days I quite like a bit of 5-star as well as a bit of dig your own loo.
The current book is billed as for lovers of road trips but haters of traffic, and I think that probably pretty much encapsulates your work. So, which is perfect. So let's get into the latest road trip, which is actually a deviation from all of those Australian ones, because this time you have motorbiked almost 10,000 kilometers through Europe. So, let's tell us all about it. Where did you start, firstly, and where did you finish?
Okay, well, we started in the UK. We actually shipped our own motorbike over. And so we shipped that from Melbourne and it arrived in a little place called Felixstowe in the UK. And we picked it up and then just got straight onto the channel and went across to France and spent 3 months to the day, as long as our visa would allow us, in Europe. It was summertime because when you ship your bike over, they only do a couple each year. And of course, most of Europe, you don't ride a motorbike in winter because it's just, unless you go down south, it's just too miserable. It's too cold. No one wants to be on a motorbike in ice and snow. And so it arrived, you tend to put it on the boat in January and it arrives in early April. So it was summer. And I've never really traveled much in Europe in summer because I hate crowds. So I always go in winter when there's less people and it's cheaper. And so this time, because it was summer and I'd never been to the Alps, we were on a motorbike. And the thing about motorbikes is twisty roads are, like catnip to motorcyclists. So we just spent almost all of that 3 months in the Alps, most of it above the snow line, most of it on back roads. And it was fabulous. Very hidey.
Oh my goodness. Oh, I do love, I think of Alps and I just start plaiting my hair. It's an instinctive thing. I don't even know that I'm doing it. Can I just backtrack though? Why did you send your bike over from Australia? Why didn't you just pick a bike up in the UK?
Because we knew we wanted to go for 3 months. And motorcycle hire is actually really expensive compared to car hire. And so we've only shipped our bike one way. It's now living in Germany in storage for our next trip. But even so, if you did it return, it's just a little bit over $5,000, which you'd be lucky to get 3 weeks motorcycle hire for $5,000. When you're going for 3 months, it pays off within a few weeks. And the bike, you don't have any issues with what you're getting and all that sort of stuff. So for a longer trip, it's definitely much more cost effective. A little bit more messing around, but much more cost effective.
Oh, amazing. And so what sort of bike was it that you've been riding?
It's called a V-Strom, which is a big tourer. So it's very comfortable tour. which is important. My husband has a few motorbikes, but I'm not allowed on half of them because they're too fast or too small. Not made for two up, apparently. This one could fit a couple of panniers and some stuff on the back, and has good suspension and all that sort of stuff that makes two up touring much more comfortable. Which, if you're on the bike for 3 months, it needs to be comfortable.
Yeah, how's your backside, I've got to ask?
Yeah, it takes about 4 days to get bike fit, and then you're okay. But the first few days are, you want a few breaks. It takes a while to get numb. The actual hardest part I find is when the bike's loaded up with the two side panniers, and then we had a box on the top as well. It's a long way to get your leg over. I actually found getting on and off the bike quite difficult. It's bigger than a horse. And a horse will sit still, whereas your husband will go, "Don't wobble the bike," as you try to get on. So
Did you have to get a little
Little's the
box?
hardest bit.
Did you have to sandbox? For those that don't know Lee, and I do, like me, not a very not tall.
Not
So,
tall.
not tall. No. Did you have to get like a mounting box or something like that to get? Would that have been easier?
Well, where would you carry it?
Yeah.
Spaces at a premium. No, you just got used to really swinging your leg up high. And I must admit, it probably didn't look very elegant, but sometimes I'd get my knee on and then do a twist and hope no one was watching.
Stylish. Actually, speaking of stylish, how is the packing? Like, this is ultra light in a this is micro light. We're talking.
Absolutely. Like even a swimming costume, I ended up getting rid of halfway through and then having to buy another one. You don't think a swimming costume takes up that much space. Because we had about 3/4 of a pannier each because we had to share the tools. I was also working, so I had a camera and laptop. So that didn't leave a lot of room for clothes at all. So basically you just wear a lot of attitude. Like, of course, this little black dress and bike boots looks great for dinner, right?
Do you have to wear leathers though? Like you were in full leathers when you were doing this?
I don't wear leathers because it was summer, so I have special bike jeans that have got I forget the name of the material, but it's like a grade resistant material. Kevlar, that you buy specialist bike gear. I had a specialist jacket that was good for rain as well as wind. So you wear all the gear. You need the protection because if you do come off, it's going down the road when you come off a motorbike is like just sliding through a cheese grater.
Oof.
So
Oof.
you want the right gear. And then, it's basically a pair of some gear if you want to go hiking on your day off, something to wear for dinner, and some shorts for summer, and that's it. Nothing else. You really pack light. But you never have to worry about, what will I wear tonight?
Well, also, I find the older I am traveling, the larger my toiletries bag is. So, pulling that down to the bare minimum, that and well, I think it's Kevlar actually, isn't it? Kevlar jeans that you were wearing, amazing. You don't have to have those like super bulky leathers. We've been having this conversation with prior knowledge because I have to backtrack for listeners because you rode Pillion for the entire time. So you are, and I've branded. I think you've branded yourself that actually, the Pillion Princess. That's a different thing in itself, isn't it too? Because traveling with one other person, but then when they're in the front, they're kind of making the decisions. But I get the feeling that you drive the destination. So are you just like the ultimate backseat driver?
Oh, no, it's absolutely the opposite. That's probably fair when I'm in a car. There are systems that you can get, and I have friends that have it, that you can rig up your helmets so that you can talk to each other and that sort of thing. We're kind of really cool not to do that. And that's one of the things I love. It's like a moving meditation. You can spend 6 hours on the bike. You haven't said a word to your partner the whole day. You're never responsible for getting lost. None of it is your fault ever. You don't have to navigate. He can't hear you when you're singing your helmet to your own tunes. And sometimes I'll just tune out and it's like a meditation. I just go, oh, what happened to that day? And I find that really energizing, just the way I would if I went to yoga in a way. So I really like the idea that you're together, but you're kind of in your own space as well. That might not suit everybody. And pillion can be hard. I've found with a lot of my friends who also ride. I don't ride. I've never got my own license. Once you know how to ride, it's very hard to be a pillion. I think that's a trust thing. But I absolutely trust my partner. He's a really good rider. I have no issues with that. Because I've never really ridden, I don't have any of those control issues either. But it is hard, I think, for people that do know how to ride on their own merits.
Yeah, I can imagine literally taking a back seat to that. Did you have music in your helmet, or were you just like total nothing? Like just
Just me singing. Yeah.
yeah. And of course, the whole point of what you're doing is you're going through this incredible scenery, and so it's a visual feast for you, really, isn't it?
Well, it's very sensual. Like you definitely feel the weather, whether it's rain, hail, heat. Smells are so powerful. You know, if you've been through roadkill or you're going through fields that have just had, fertilizer on them or beautiful flowers, you'll smell all salt. You'll smell all that stuff and you really feel part of the landscape. And that's one of the things I love about it too. You don't feel like you're just passing through. You're part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you started in France. Can you give us just an exact starting point? You came off the channel, or you came through the channel, and then where did you end up?
We worked our way down to the south of France, down the route Napoleon, following the route that Napoleon took originally in reverse, because he came from Corsica up when he came back from exile. But that's all through the foothills of the Alps. And then we got into the Alps. And then from France, we were in, trying to remember the exact order, because we zigzagged around a bit, but by the end of the day, end of the 3 months, we'd done Italy, Switzerland, Austria, Slovenia, the Bavarian Alps in Germany. The only time we weren't in the mountains was we took a little beach holiday in Sardinia for 2 weeks, which and then had to leave the bike there because it decided it didn't like its radiator anymore, and we left it there to get repaired and just hired a car for the 10 days. And then when we got the invoice back, I think it was something lost in translation, but it had an intervention, which made me feel like all the mechanics sat round in a circle and said, "You must behave and not overheat anymore."
I do love it. And when you traveled, did you have a theme to the trip? I mean, was there a theme, or there were things that you had to see, you had to tick off? Or I mean, ticking off sounds so literal, but what guided your path?
I was desperate to see the Alps because it was my first time in summer. So that was the main theme. What we tend to do is we'll pick a small town. One of the things about riding by motorbike is sightseeing is actually quite difficult. We normally love doing lots of hiking and museums and stuff, but walking around, especially in summer when it's really hot, in all your bike gear, carrying your helmet and your jacket, because security is an issue. You can't really leave the bike on the street because all your worldly goods and laptops are just in a pannier on the back of the bike. Um, and it's just awful walking around in bike gear. It's nice when you're moving on the bike, but not once you're on the ground. So we find a little town, smaller the better. We didn't really like cities, partly for the security of parking the bike. And we needed somewhere usually undercover where we could park the bike at night. So Airbnbs were our go-to. And we'd stay for anywhere between 3 days to a week in each place and then do little day trips from that place. Or we could walk to national parks or museums or whatever it was we wanted to do in normal clothes rather than in our bike gear. So that kind of led us. But we made it up as we went along. Usually we would book our next stage from the stage before. So usually a couple of days to a week in advance, which is not bad given it was July and August and peak season.
And what sort of places, what accommodation were you staying in?
A lot of Airbnbs, a few farm stays, but mostly just Airbnbs that were in towns that we could walk everywhere for dinner. We didn't have to get on the bike to go to dinner or anything like that. And that usually had a garage or undercover parking and a laundry because we had no clothes. So we had to wash every day.
Of course. And I guess by staying in those small towns or villages even, then you're not paying the prices that you'd be paying in Rome or Milan or all of those big cities. I mean, places like Vienna are pretty frightening at times for their accommodation. So did you find that it financially it was a better strategy?
I think so, definitely. And you can self-cater the breakfast. I mean, one of the things about the bike is, we had to buy olive oil every 3 days because you can't really take your leftover salt and pepper and olive oil and those sort of basics with you, which you might do if you've got a car. But having our own laundry and things certainly saved money. There's a real bike culture too in Europe, more so than here in Australia. Here in Australia, I just feel a bit weird if I end up in a restaurant and all my bike here, but over there it's very, very normal. And so that really opened up doors for us too. And Airbnb owners, when they met us and found out we're on bikes, they'd often want to come for a ride with us or tell us about their friends that rode or their adventures when they rode. So it just seemed to be a real conversation starter with people too, which was sometimes difficult when it was in Slovenian, but we got there.
So actually that little black dress with the motorcycle boots is quite chic, right?
Quite well, maybe.
Is there some sort of online network as well, like that you tap into when you're doing these sorts of things? Like, I mean, are there Facebook pages or were you involved in them, or do you steer clear of that sort of thing?
There is, but we kind of just, made it up as we went along. I guess because we've been interested in this for a long time, we've got a lot of friends that do it. So there is a bit of word of mouth, but there are definitely Facebook groups that for special areas that will tell you about nice roads, particularly in places like Australia and New Zealand, bike-friendly pubs, places like that. Because sometimes, especially if you're with a group of friends, or if you're in Queensland, where it's not legal to ride bikes with groups of friends, you can get a bit of a reaction, when you turn up as a bikie, even though you're all middle-aged and most of you are accountants or journalists or something really boring.
What about I mean, I think it sounds fantastic. I don't know anybody with a bike. Is there any sort of, like a matchmaking system if I wanted to be a Pillion Princess? Is that a thing?
It is for day trips. A lot of cities in particular, you can go on a day trip either on the back of a bike. Often Harley riders will set up and you can get on a Harley or sidecars. I did one about 2 years ago all through Jasper and around there in the Rockies in a sidecar on a Harley, and they dressed you up in the leather and the chaps and all the rest. And we went bear spotting on a motorbike, which freaked me out a little bit because I was like, well, aren't we right at their sort of eating level? But anyway, it all worked out. Longer trips, you can certainly do groups where you can hire the bike, but as a pillion, it's not that I know of. There may be. I mean, if you do enough research, you might, but it's not mainstream. It's not something I know of. I've done a couple of trips in India and Vietnam where it's a motorcycle tour, but we'll get 10 of us, half pillion, half not, just of our mates, and we'll just book up a whole tour. And then it's just us, and we can then also make some changes with the tour operators, and that's a really nice way to go because we all know how everyone rides. We all ride to lunch all the time for years, so we trust everybody that they're all at the same level. But there are lots of other groups you can join. But as a pillion, if you don't know the rider, and it's a trust thing, you've got to really trust that they're a good rider because your life's in their hands.
Yeah, that is kind of tricky. I have actually read, I have heard about, there's a group there's a guy that takes tours in India on Royal Enfields, so you can fly over there and then jump on it because that's such a classic bike, and they've got really, really, really big mountains, but it's like a supported ride as well. And I always thought I would like to do that, but I'd want to be sitting behind the guy who actually did it. Like I want to sit behind the owner, because that's where I'm going with the trust issue as well. Do you have any solid advice if somebody else is planning a similar sort of trip, like riding motorbikes through Europe? I mean, talking about that idea of shipping your own bike over, and packing. Any other those things that you've learned from hard experience?
Definitely don't take too much. Take very little, and then if you find you really need something, buy it there because, I posted a whole heap of that stuff back from Sardinia and it cost a fortune. So you won't need as much stuff as you need. Except the weather. You're never going to get perfect weather. And, often if it was really rainy, we wouldn't set off that day. We'd change our plan. It's a bit like I don't camp in the wet either. So, but you've got to know your own riding levels. So Europe, it's good roads, it's good bike culture. Somewhere like India, you've got a different level of craziness completely in terms of traffic. Vietnam, same thing. Check your insurance. A lot of travel insurance won't include motorbike riding. Even those that do won't include it if it's not a hired bike. So if you're borrowing a friend's bike or you're taking your own bike, it doesn't include it. So, and the last thing you want is to have an accident and find out you don't have travel insurance. So you really check your insurance.
So who did you insure with?
RACV,
Yeah, right.
because they did cover us for our own bikes, and there's not many that do.
Yeah, that is really interesting. What a great tip as well. So are you writing a book about this trip? Or am I jumping the gun here?
I certainly have been writing stories, and I had my camera and laptop with me. But I've been busy finishing off these two before I start thinking about the next one. So we'll see how that goes. But you know, on a flight, Belle, wherever you go, you see a good story and you're like,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I imagine when you got off the bike, like, do you have a practice of, because I think you're a very organized person, you have a practice of writing, like you put aside an hour or so to catch your notes, because you can't ride on the back of a bike. I mean, I've just been writing on safari, and that's in the back of a four-wheel drive. And I swear to goodness, my notes look like a doctor's handwriting. I don't know how I'm going to get through them all. I've got to rewrite them before I forget them all. How did you manage taking notes on a bike?
these days I tend to take visual notes. So I had my camera around my neck and I took lots and lots of photos, lots of videos that I knew weren't great photos or videos, but it was to remind me, what was this little stretch of road like? What was this scenery like? So I take those sort of visual notes now, and I would try every night, but it is tiring. You're just sitting on the back of the bike, but you'll be surprised at how exhausted you are by the end of the day, because you're buffeted by the wind, you're using your core muscles to stay up, all sorts of things that you don't think about so much when you're in a car.
I was about to say, you must have like a core of steel by now. You're like totally rigid. Now, last question. I have so many questions on this one, but we've core, insurance, like what you're packing and eating and stuff. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask you the last question, which I'm actually really excited to find out, because you have been traveling for so long and so widely. I'm after your most bizarre travel adventure, and it's anywhere in the world, and it doesn't have to include bikes.
Sure. That might need a bottle of wine because there's been a few, but there is one that comes to mind, and it is actually bike related. It was in India, and one of our group, who shall remain nameless, had left their wallet at the place we were staying at. And so after an hour or so on the road, he remembered, and one went back to get it, and we all stayed at a lookout taking selfies underneath a sign that said, don't take selfies. And the next thing we knew, this monkey came down from the trees, got into our bag and took out our toiletries bag, passport, all that stuff you pack right at the last minute except the wallet, and went up into a tree and then just started to go through all our toothpaste, toothbrush, everything, threw some of it down. I'm thinking, how do I get my passport back out the monkey up the tree? How am I going to tell, my travel insurance that a monkey stole my passport off a motorbike?
Did you get your passport back?
That didn't get the toothpaste back.
I think we've got a theme about naughty monkeys, because they always crop up, especially every time we talk about travel insurance and animals. Like we talk about monkeys. I mean, I'm all about them, having just come back from South Africa and had a pile of baboons infest my pool, but that is terrifying. What a mongrel. God, that is so good. I love it. I'm pleased that you've got it back, because it means that you can continue to travel without paying the world's most expensive passport fee yet again. Lee, thanks so much for coming on to The World Awaits, where we're going to drop a list of all of your books in there. Congratulations on an epic 10,000-kilometre adventure across Europe, and good luck with the next one.
Thank you.
This podcast is becoming a litany of monkey crimes. That was author and travel writer Lee Atkinson on motorcycling through Europe. And you can see more about Lee and her 20 books at leeatkinson.com.au. If you'd like to help support our production costs, you can buy us a coffee at coffee.com/theworldawaits. That's ko-fi.com/theworldawaits, so we can continue to bring you inspirational travel interviews with the world's best. As we mentioned at the top of the pod this week, the war in the Middle East has thrown global travel into chaos, with some of the world's major aviation hubs closed or running at extremely limited services, and things are changing all the time, obviously. So we're talking at a time of recording this. And our tip this week is some practical expert advice on what travellers need to know right now.
Yeah, the Australian Travel Industry Association is the peak body representing, obviously, Australia's travel industry, and that includes travel agents and tour operators. And spokesperson Ding Long said, firstly, if you are traveling in the next few weeks or the coming months, do not cancel your flights. He is absolutely emphatic about this.
Yeah, he said if you panic cancel the trips, then you're wiping out rights for a refund or rebooking. And instead, he advises that you just wait for your airline to act.
The ATIA has created a checklist of actions to take. Amongst them, downloading the airline's app this is where you'll get your first accurate information, which is direct from the airline. From here, you can see if your flight is actually going ahead. And also, he advises to register your plans with the Australian Government Smart Traveller website, which is, of course, smarttraveller.gov.au, because then the government knows where its citizens are around the world when there is such tragedies occurring.
If you're travelling in the next few months, or not necessarily travelling, but have flights planned for the next few months, he also advises that just get on the phone, obviously, straight away to your travel advisor if you have booked via one, which is obviously, this is increasingly proving the value in doing that, to make sure and see what else you can do, because travel advisors obviously won't put you in a situation that's unsafe and will make sure they have the best advice. They've absolutely got their finger on the pulse. Asia is open and still operating, including Singapore Airlines, and there are also multiple Chinese carriers operating normally too.
That is really reassuring advice. I've got to say that one rising star out of this mess in the Middle East has been Muscat Airport in neighbouring, usually peaceful Oman, which is a beautiful little airport that's been positioning itself as an alternative to the big hubs. And I've flown in and out of it a few times. And look at who's in your alliances, such as the One World Alliance, which Oman Air is with Qatar and Qantas. Just to keep in mind, but of course, those countries are increasingly being dragged into this conflict. So, what we're recording today is going to be different to what's going to be happening tomorrow. That is the uncertainty of the situation.
Next week, I'm taking you to New Zealand's Marlborough Sounds region for a hike, bike and kayak on the Queen Charlotte track. This is one of my favourite parts of New Zealand and the world. And there's more reason than ever now to travel closer to home. So you'll want to tune in and find out what makes this region a must visit on any trip to Aotearoa.
Back in your heartland, Kirsty. You can jump onto Kirsty's Instagram for a teaser of all of the fabulous scenery we'll be talking about next week. And we'd love it if you followed us on socials. You'll find us at The World Awaits Podcast on Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn. And please feel free to drop us a line at hello@theworldawaits.au. Or if you're enjoying this episode, give us a rating or a review.
That's a wrap for The World Awaits this week. Click to subscribe anywhere you listen to your favourite pods.
Thanks for listening. See you next week.